People will tell you you have to do it even if you hate it, and you don't. You can work around it. And that might be a small microcosm of the business you want to do, or it might be like the big picture, like, oh, well, you got a degree in it, so you just gotta stick out that career. No, you don't. You absolutely don't.
That was Dave Dellanave, and you're listening to episode 192 of the Building Psychological Strength podcast, where we uncover the information, tools, and techniques to turn our mind into our most valuable asset.
The courage to face fears with persistence.
Being able to be present enough in this moment to choose my response thoughtfully.
We have the strength to bend to life stressors, to bend to adversity without snapping, without breaking.
There are only 6 things that contribute to our quality of life, and they are all experiences.
In every moment, we are deciding who we want to be and how we want to live our lives.
Noticing what your brain is doing and then being able to make choices.
Mobilize the things that we know lift us up.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Building Psychological Strength podcast. My name is April and I'm your host. Today, friends, we are talking life design. I'm so excited for today's conversation because if you have listened to me at all, you know how passionate I am about helping people get the tools, the information, the inspiration they need in order to live the life they actually want to live. Not the one that other people think you should live, not the one that you feel like you should live, not the one that is basically a passive assumption where you follow the rules and do things that, external people and circumstances want you to do. The one that actually feels right and vibrant and aligned and amazing. And today I am bringing a guest on who truly embodies so many of the foundational principles of life design, just in the way that he naturally lives life. This is a personal friend of mine who I've connected with in a variety of ways throughout life in the past, I would say, decade or so. We have done skydives together. He was my trainer for a while when I was powerlifting. I was just a member at his gym for a while and am now just a friend of his and a very big supporter of the way that he lives life. Today, we are speaking with Mr. Dave Dellanave. He is, I don't even know how to start. Actually, I'm just going to read what is on his website because I feel like that's the best way to get to know who he is. It says, "Hi, I'm David Dellanave. Depending on the day, you could call me an entrepreneur, baker, lifter, skydiver, tinkerer, investor, carpenter, writer, welder, hunter, coach, plus 100 other things. After I sold my first major company and opened a first-of-its-kind gym, I realized that not only was the usual advice to become the best at one thing not right for me, in fact, being really good at a million things is what makes me tick, and I can teach you to be good at everything. What are you interested in?" That's what his website front page says about him. And that is exactly who he is to a T as a person. I wanted to talk to him in this episode because tell me if you've ever experienced this, or tell me if you know somebody who's ever experienced this. You are going along in life, maybe it's in your job or a relationship. Typically, it's one of those really big foundational aspects of life. And you realize that things don't feel right. You're not loving it. You're not enjoying it anymore. But you feel like you've put so much time and effort and resources into this thing, this job, this relationship, this hobby, this whatever, that you can't back out now. Oh my gosh, you've invested so much in it. How could you back out now? And so you continue to go and you continue to slog and you don't make any changes because you feel like you can't because of the time that you've invested so far. Or maybe this one, you don't even realize that the set of rules that you're following, the set of rules around maybe picking a major and going to college and getting a good 9-to-5 job and working in that corporate environment and working your way up the ladder and, getting married by a certain age and all of that, you followed those rules without even realizing that they aren't rules. They're not rules. They're just assumptions. And they're assumptions that a lot of people live by. And maybe they're assumptions that are really great for a lot of people, but they aren't for everyone. And I would argue that even if those assumptions are really great for you, very few people are making that choice in an active way. Very few people are saying, yes, this is the path that I want to go down and continue to go down. Instead, we all just involuntarily, we passively march to this set of assumptions that we treat as facts and rules and hard evidence when it isn't. And the whole reason why I love the field of life design is it because it snaps us out of that. One of the key components to life design is experimentation. You're basically saying, here's something that I'm treating as fact. Here's a rule that I am treating as fact. Let me experiment and mess with that to see if this fact holds water, or to see if this is just an assumption that I was making that was holding me in the place that I'm at today. So that is why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation. We get into a ton, and you are not going to want to miss a second of this. We talk a little bit about Dave's background, not because like Dave is some famous person. I mean, he's fairly well known, in the skydiving world and in the fitness world, but more so because I want to give you an example of a person who has been practicing these principles unknowingly, probably in his part, just doing what naturally comes to him, but practicing these principles for so many years. And the place that you can get to when you focus on making small changes every day, when you focus on continually just nudging your life in the direction that feels good and that feels right for you, even if it might not be right for other people. I want to show you where you can get if you continually commit to that practice. So with Dave, we talk a lot about these assumptions that we treat as facts. We also talk about how for a lot of us, when we want to break those assumptions, so even something as simple as changing a hobby, instead of doing yoga, you want to take up watercoloring now, or something even more simple as I started reading a book and I decided I didn't like it halfway through, and so I want to quit the book and I don't want to do it anymore. Making small changes like that can feel like blasphemy. It can feel like we're doing something wrong, like no one's giving me permission to make this change. Who am I to be doing this? Let alone really major life changes. These small things can feel really difficult. So we talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about Dave's approach to that permission, and basically his stance that knowledge, and in particular, knowledge that you get by doing something, by actually experiencing it. Knowledge is more powerful than a certification or a piece of paper that technically gives you, the official permission that most people are looking for. So we talk about that too. We talk about Dave's approach in tackling really big things by not really focusing on how big they are, by really focusing on how can I take the path of least resistance to continue down this path without really focusing on what the end goal necessarily is. He's just correcting and adjusting and nudging as he's going along and just enjoying the journey. We also talked about his tolerance for uncertainty and when things are changing. It's just a really meaty, loaded, inspirational conversation. I really want you guys to listen to the end of this. You're really going to take a lot out of this. He's got an incredible tip at the end of this about if you are that person, if you're the person who feels stuck, if you're the person who feels like they've invested too much and can't change, if you're the person who feels like you need permission to change, any of those things where you get this inkling that there's something you want to be doing, but you're not, he has a brilliant piece of advice at the end of this episode. So you're not going to want to miss that. All right, I have gabbed on and on. It's just because I'm so excited for you all to meet this awesome human being. I can't wait for you to meet him. So let's roll that interview. Dave Dellanave, I am so pumped that you're here because you have one of the more interesting journeys, paths, lives, sets of experiences of anybody that I've ever met. And so I'm really excited to have what is probably a pretty cool life design conversation today. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and talk about this stuff with you. It's going to be fun.
Awesome. So It's actually a really tough episode for me to even open up with because, you're one of those people who you're a complex person to describe. And I always like to at least give my audience an idea of who it is they're hearing from right in the beginning. So they're like, oh yeah, I'm driving with that person. I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. I want to dive in more and I want to learn more. But you're a tough person to describe. And I was thinking about the best way to do it. And what I decided to say is this. When people look at me and they look at the set of experiences that I've had in my life, they see a wide variety of experiences. They see, some fitness things and some, hobbies that I've tried and jobs and entrepreneur stuff and whatever. And I like to say that when I see something that I want to try, I don't, necessarily just sort of dangle my feet in the pool. I like get in the pool and swim around a little. So maybe I do one skydive and then I want to get a license, or maybe I do one scuba dive and I want to get certified, or I learn to deadlift and I'm like, cool, what's up with these, weightlifting competitions? Let me try that out. I like to try new things and take lessons from them. So I get in the pool and I swim around. I like to think about you as somebody who sees the same pool, then buys the pool, digs a new deep end, and jumps right into the deep end that nobody even realized was there and has the biggest pool party ever. I mean, you just like get in head first to stuff.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I love your take on it. And I can definitely obviously relate to that. And I appreciate the compliment in like that, that I do it bigger and better. I don't know if it's true or not. But I do like to dive into things. And I love that you do that, because I don't think that you experience something in any really truly meaningful way by just dipping your toes in. Like if you just go do a tandem skydive, yes, you can check skydiving off your bucket list. But do you know what it's like to be a skydiver? Like I was out there yesterday and we were waiting on clouds, and I was joking that the tandems that were sitting there waiting for weather, I always love when I see that, because then it's like they're real skydivers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because part of skydiving is sitting around waiting for the weather to change and doing whatever dangerous stuff we do in that, and like that's part of the totality of the experience that you don't get if you just come out and you go on your amusement park ride for, 30 minutes or whatever, and then you leave and you check it off your list. And that's kind of an analogy for anything that you do very superficially.
Yeah, I totally agree. So where I'd love to jump in here is with an assumption that a lot of people in our society live with, whether you realize that you live with this assumption or not. Most of us, and I would include myself in this as well, but others even to more degree than this, we live with this assumption that somehow we develop into a certain person who does certain types of things, who goes certain places and has a certain job and has certain people they hang out with. We basically, we carve our lane and then we run in our lane for the majority of our lives. So even something as simple, we were joking before we started recording that, people get weird even a little bit about hobbies, something as simple as what you do with your free time. We see this backlash against people who sort of jump around between hobbies. Like, well, I thought you were doing yoga. Now you're going to say you're going to like watercolor paint. Like you've never done that before. There's this set of unspoken rules in our society that you carve your lane and you stay in it, and you super don't do that. So I'm wondering if you can tell the audience, just again, so they can get to know the type of person they're about to hear from, a little bit about which lanes you've run in. And they don't even have to be ones that you're currently running in, but just like ones you have decently dabbled in to get a good flavor for that activity.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the hardest questions for me to ever answer is whether it be like in an interview or an icebreaker or even like a date situation. It's like, oh, what do you like to do? And I just, all of a sudden I'm stammering and I'm like, oh, I don't know, like I can't answer it because it's literally so varied that on any given day, I don't really know how to answer a question that's that simple. And to your point, what's the number one question anybody asks someone at like a social event? What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And it usually means work, because, and I don't know if this is a Western thing, but you are just defined by that path that you kind of described. Like what college are you going to go to? What's your major? What's your degree going to be? What's your job? And then do that job forever. I think maybe the easiest way to kind of describe my varied interest maybe is just like a really quick kind of autobiography, as briefly as I possibly can. I'm the son of an immigrant. I was born in Italy, and my dad came over here when he was 40 some years old. So I got a whole set of influences from Italy that I would not have gotten, being born in the States. We went back to Italy every summer for about a month, usually right after school got out. My mom was a teacher, so as soon as school got out, we'd go to Italy for a month. So I had this whole set of influences there. As a kid, I was super into tech. Like one of my earliest jobs wasn't bagging groceries. It was actually doing like essentially IT work for a nonprofit organization. And I was making like $20 an hour I'm talking like 93, as like a 10 or 12-year-old, I was making $20 an hour. I mean, it was just unreal money at the time. But then I was also into like camping, and I was in the Boy Scouts. So I was doing like outdoorsy stuff. So I had like this like super nerdy, tech track going, but I also had like some outdoors and like hunting and hiking and stuff like that. And then I went to college for a little bit, and I always tell people that I Kanye'd. I didn't graduate. I decided I was finished because I had built I don't know if you remember ringtones.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I had built a ringtone website, and I'll never forget this. I was running Google AdSense ads on the website, which I later learned, like I was only capturing maybe a tiny fraction of the advertising revenue I really could be making with the site. But with AdSense, I was making $300 a day, and I multiplied 300 times 365. And I was like, holy crap, I'm making six figures. Like, why would you stay in school if you're making six figures, right? Like, that's it. That's the goal. You already made it. So I quit school, pursued tech, started a company, sold that company. That was 2007. And all along the way, primarily because of tech work, I had a lot of disposable income, and I would always pour that income into various interests and projects. So building things is a passion of mine. Right now I'm building a camper van, and that's kind of using like all of the skills that I have. I was welding a bed frame the other day, carpentry, like, cabinets and stuff like that. Electrical, like the van has full solar power and batteries, so it can be completely off the grid. Electronics and electrical stuff is a big passion of mine. That's actually what I originally went to school for, was electrical and computer engineering. I skydive. I mean, like, I don't like to talk about myself in a self-aggrandizing way. But if this is what we're talking about, like, I want to describe my experiences and my paths and stuff like that. So it kind of have to. About 10 years ago, I started a gym because I had a tremendous passion for fitness. And I don't remember, is that how we originally met, or was it through skydiving?
It was like an accidental post on Facebook. I saw a skydive picture of you just before I was going out to do my first tandem.
Okay, cool. So we met through skydiving, and then you remember my gym and powerlifted with us. So I had this intense passion for fitness. And now, because of COVID, as of essentially like the last couple months or so, I've started telling people, when they ask me what I do, I tell them I'm an olive oil importer, because the COVID situation has just totally decimated the gym. And through some strokes of luck, this olive oil thing that I started about a year ago has really, really, really taken off. So that's kind of the path I'm going down now. And I just, last November, I took a crew of buddies of mine, but also professional film and photographers to Italy, and we did a documentary. So, yeah, I think that scratches the surface of the interests that I have.
I'm going to round this out with a couple of other things as well. Crazy pig hunter, weird pig hunting trips. Great. Yep. Like wild boars.
True.
Right.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, cool. And then some of you may know, Dave and I both live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. The recent events around George Floyd and all of that, Dave is I don't even know if I should be saying this, but potentially or partially responsible for this amazing display that was projected onto one of the most iconic buildings in Minneapolis, St. Paul, of just images of the unrest and the protesting that was going on really across the world. But so your hands, I asked you to go through all of that because it's skydive, it's tech stuff, it's olive oil, it's travel, it's the gym, it's entrepreneurship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here's where I want to start. Did you ever, at any of those junctures, because I love the almost record scratch you had. Yeah, so I was doing this gym and now I tell people I'm an olive oil importer. It's like, what? What? Did you at any point in time ever question or feel like you weren't qualified to do the next thing that you were getting into? Or what if people think like, who am I to do this? I'm not qualified. I don't have a piece of paper. I don't have permission. People are going to think that I'm fake. Like, did that ever enter your mind at any of these steps?
I mean, I have self-doubt all the time, but I don't have self-doubt that stops me from doing it anyway. I have doubt that it's going to work, or if I should be doing that, or if maybe I should be doing something else, but none of that ever stops me from doing it. Like if I'm interested and I want to do it and I want to try it, I just do it. I am not a believer in qualifications, and I think we could probably do a whole podcast on that. And when I say that, let me be clear. What I'm talking about are legible qualifications, like degrees or certifications, things like that. I'm a firm believer in knowledge. Or there's this concept that one of my favorite authors, the guy by the name of James C. Scotty, writes about anarchist theory, wrote this book called Seeing Like a State. And he introduced this concept of metis. And metis is knowledge that cannot easily or even at all be codified and written down. It's the kind of thing you only learn by, let's say, apprenticeship, because you have to use your analogy, you have to get into the pool to understand it. You can't read it. You can't transfer it. You can't transmit it over the internet. It's a different type of knowledge. So I'm a big believer in that, but I totally don't believe in like degrees and qualifications and certifications and stuff like that. I just don't think they matter.
Because you're doing this olive oil importing business right now. You didn't go to school for international business, did not go to school for, have we mentioned, P.S., your family also just bought an olive grove, like an olive tree grove?
Yeah, we did. We bought about 200 trees of olives in Italy.
That's what I mean. You bought the pool, like you bought the whole pool and dug a new deep end.
But that's like a perfect example. I don't have a degree in international business, or I don't have a olive oil importer certification. But what I do have are 36 years of being steeped in a culture that prizes olive oil as like one of the most important ingredients. And I have, 36 years of going back to Italy and tasting the newest olive oil and knowing exactly where it comes from and exactly where it's made, and going to places that do it the right way and going to places that do it the wrong way, and knowing who is who and so on and so forth. That's what I do have. And that's what I'm talking about, is the difference between, qualified and certified, so to speak.
But that's a path. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a path that most don't see, right? We've gone on and we've checked off the sort of, I don't want to call them culmination boxes, because I don't think you're done with any of the stuff that you're doing, but you've reached a level that people would point at you and say, wow, he's achieved how many thousand skydives?
1,400 almost.
1,400. Okay. So north of 1,000 skydives. That's a lot. He owned a gym, and you didn't just deadlift occasionally, right? You're like some kind of deadlift crazy record holder.
I set a world record in the deadlift. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Deep end of the pool. You have a successful olive importing business. These are all sort of the things that people would point at and say, Dave achieved this thing. But behind every one of those, you had a first tandem skydive. You had probably a really terrible hop and pop, which this is like where you are low to the ground and you have to jump out. P.S. Dave filmed a very terrible hop and pop of mine. Awful. But the point I'm trying to make is that along every one of these paths that you've been on, I promise there have been, there's been friction and adversity and failure and hard points, and people don't see that. How do you navigate that? Like, how do you keep going? How do you still see the end in mind? Or is it just about the path?
Well, so one of my biggest, I guess, I don't know what the term for it is, sort of ideologies is really truly to take the path of least resistance. It might seem to people like I have the Midas touch and everything I do, I excel or crush at. Like, he started an olive oil business and like a year later, it's just booming, and that's not it. I've started so many things that have gone nowhere. I've ceased to finish so many projects that I've started, but I do know when I've caught a good wave and I can start to ride it. And I think I'm pretty good at kind of staying on the edge of that wave, to sort of use like a surfing analogy. Like the olive oil thing was completely an accident. A mutual friend of ours, who I believe Joanne, anyway, it doesn't matter. Friend of ours sent me a message a year and a half ago, January, and said, "Hey, can I get some of that great olive oil you used to get from your family friend? I need a case of it. I'll pay you back." And I had just been in Italy. People had just been telling me how great the olive oil harvest was that year, in terms of both quality and the yield and quantity. And I thought, yeah, I can order a few cases, no problem. And I threw it out to my Instagram and I just said, "Hey, friends, you've seen me rant and rave about how bad most olive oil is. I'm going to order some. If you want a bottle, just let me know. You can pay me later and I'll order some." And it blew up. Like, I had to start making a spreadsheet to keep track of everyone that had responded. I thought it would be a few messages I could just keep in my inbox and tally them from there. I had to make a spreadsheet. After the third order, I think I created like a custom system to track the orders. I mean, I didn't set out, and this is a mistake I think a lot of people make. They decide they want to start a business, right? They're like, I want to sell window blinds, and I'm so good at selecting beautiful blinds. All of my friends have told me my blinds are the best. I can do this. And they create a business plan and a logo, and they do all of these steps. And then they go out to find their first customer, and people are like, "Oh, I don't need help selecting blinds. I just go to blinds.com and order, the ones that look good." And they didn't consider that maybe they should have found a customer in the first place. So anyway, my point is, I don't start like with the end in mind and like create the whole structure and then do it. I just go incrementally, a little bit into it and see how it's going. And if I'm not finding too much resistance, that's when I go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I usually do end up pretty far in, but I don't start by going as far as I can, because I think what happens a lot of times then is you run into the resistance that maybe you're not actually cut out for that thing, or maybe you live in the wrong part of the country to do that thing, and you're just going to experience so much more resistance than if you were to do something else that is better suited and is going to go more easily. And if you've ever surfed, like, the analogy makes sense, because like you paddle out, but then you have to choose which wave you're actually going to take. It's just not like a continuous flow of identical waves and you can just hop on one. There's better ones and worse ones, and you have to choose. And there's an opportunity cost to choosing, because if you choose poorly, you get taken in by that crappy wave, and then you have to paddle back out and wait for the next one. And that's the exact same thing as like starting a business and not realizing that you chose kind of the wrong path and you went too deep into it, and now you got to paddle all the way back out and start over. So I'm a really big fan of kind of taking the path of least resistance and then pursuing it and riding that wave.
I love that. There's a couple of things that I want to tease out of that to just tie back what you're saying to things that this audience has heard, psychological principles, because there's a lot in there. Number one, the path of least resistance. So many times, one of the things that we teach people around the life design process is this brutal honesty. And I'm not talking like, I know myself and I can be authentically me and whatever. No, I'm talking like brutal honesty about what you like doing and what you don't like doing, about what you're good at and what you're not good at. Like the honesty level that comes after drinking 3 glasses of wine and you're like, you know what? I hate doing that. Like that part where you are willing to admit the biggest impulses of your gut. And if you can somehow not only admit those to yourself, but play with them, like stay away from the stuff that you absolutely despise doing and actively try to steer the ship away from that stuff, that's going to get you a long way. So this just brutal honesty with yourself, which again, you don't owe that explanation to anybody else, but dang it, you owe it to yourself. Like you're the person at the center of your own life and you owe yourself the gift of being brutally honest about what you do and don't like as just a guidepost. We talk in a lot of our programs about using values and signature strengths in that regard, but also this radical honesty about like, nope, I just don't like it. I just don't want to. It's a huge guide point to try to figure out what that path of least resistance is. The other piece that I want to call out is there is a bias or just a cognitive shortcut and shortcoming that we all have that is called the sunk cost fallacy. The more work you put into something, especially as that something doesn't work out, the more work that you've put into it, by the time you realize it's not working, the harder it is for you to backpedal out, admit it's not working, and adjust course and do something new. We see like, I can't, and you've probably either said this yourself, not you, Dave, because you don't have normal jobs, but like people who have normal 9-to-5 jobs. You may have said this yourself or heard somebody else. I can't quit. I've spent so much time building my career there. Well, if you're miserable, quit. Like find a new job. Who cares? Right. Yeah. But we have this sunk cost fallacy that somehow the effort and time and resources we've put in have been wasted. And then when you pile that on with where we started this episode around the assumption that we all in society somehow run with, that we should pick our lane and stay there, you can see why people can't pivot in the way that you do so easily. They feel literally cemented in place.
Yep. I want to circle back to one thing you were talking about, like these things that are resistance and that you hate doing them, but then people tell you, well, you just have to do it. You know, it's just sort of like necessary. Let me give you a quick little example of that. So I've built one of the most successful gyms in the country. I mean, we've been in Men's Health numerous times as like just one of the best gyms. Many, many years ago when I was first starting, I went to a fitness business mentorship. This like fitness business guru was putting this thing on. And he had this whole thing about phone rings, door swings, and email dings or something like that. Like it was all about the sales process, right? And he was raving about how important the phone was, like answering the phone, because every time you'd answer the gym phone, it was like a potential customer and money on the other end of the line. And I raised my hand and I was like, hey, I have a question. I absolutely hate answering the phone. I don't do it. I won't do it. Do you know of any services that I can like subcontract out or whatever to do that for me, because I'm not going to do it? I got admonished not only by all the participants, but by this guru of like, no, you have to do it. You're leaving money on the table. You have to do it. That's so important. You know what I ended up doing? I went home and I put a voicemail message on our gym phone that said, we don't use the phone. And if you want to contact us, go to our website or email us. And is that the best thing? No, of course not. It would have been better if I loved answering the phone and talked to every person like they were like, the next new gym member. But was I able to build one of the best gyms in the country despite the fact that I was unwilling to do that thing that I hated doing? Yes. So, it's just like a little microcosm of an example of something that people will tell you have to do it even if you hate it, and you don't. Mm-hmm. You can work around it. And that might be a small microcosm of the business you want to do, or it might be like the big picture, like, oh, well, you got a degree in it, so you gotta stick out that career. No, you don't. You absolutely don't.
Mm-hmm. Something that, so I was a member of your gym for a number of years, and something that you say more than once a day at that gym is, does it test well? So for you individually, have you, and this is in the case of certain movements, right? Certain lifts that you might do, but this is in the case of everything else, right? Does it test well? Is this something that sits well with you? And if it doesn't, you're going to put in an equivalent amount of effort as you would with something that tests well, and you're not going to get as much movement from that. You're not going to get as much value from it because you're going to be fighting against friction that just isn't working for you.
Absolutely. And a worst case, you're going to get hurt because you've got an internal friction that you're not respecting. And when you could be doing something that's going to get you more with so much less internal friction. And like, we're talking about that specifically in like a biofeedback context where you're actually listening to your body's response. But I have people come in and after a few months of membership and they'd be like, hey, I put in my 2 weeks notice at my job today. And the reason I did that was because that job didn't test well anymore. I realized that every day, like I was making myself worse just by going to that office. Yeah. And that was one of the coolest reasons to even be in the gym. It wasn't the weights that were lifted. It was the life things that came from it.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to note, and this goes back to, this relates to your 36 years of going back to Italy and, selling individual bottles of olive oil and seeing what happens, and then finally making a spreadsheet, et cetera. The other piece that we talk about a lot at your gym was this notion of PR every day. And what that means is set a personal record every single day. But what I think that gets misconstrued a lot. People think, oh, you should make some massive gain every single day. 99.9% of quote unquote PRs are a fraction of an improvement over what you've been able to do the day before. You make these tiny incremental steps and improvements forward that over time add up to a massive shift. James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits, talks about this a ton. He says, each behavior that you do is a vote in favor or against the person that you want to be. Every single little microscopic behavior is one vote. You're either voting for or you're voting against it with the behaviors that you do. That is such a microscopic level to look at this. And I think that makes the big things that you've done, if you think about the microscopic decisions you were making and the microscopic steps that you were taking, it makes it all less intimidating because we're talking about, oh, I got an email from a friend. Yeah, let me just get you a bottle of olive oil. Like, that's not scary. You can get somebody a bottle of olive oil. Like, that's okay, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then you just build from there. I love that.
And you just build on it. And I think intuition is a big part of it. Like, I've built this whole business based purely on my intuition, like not trying to push it too hard. I think that if I had been like, oh my God, this is an opportunity, and then let me build a new website and build a new logo and do all this stuff, and then tell people that I'm starting to take orders, and I think I would have killed it, because I think people would have been like, oh, that's kind of gross. He totally turned that into a business right away. But instead, I just gradually, slowly built it up, always cognizant of the fact that if I pushed too hard, instead of taking that path of least resistance, if I tried to push on it, I'd actually force it and break it. But you just gently kind of coax it forward. It works so much better. And I like the lifestyle so much better. Like, I think that work is really important and it should be fulfilling. And obviously we need to pay our bills, but I also want to work sort of the minimal effective amount so that I can do so many other things as much as I possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to circle back to something you said before around, there's all these things that I've done really well. There's achievements that I've had, but there's a ton of things that didn't work. There's a ton of projects that went unfinished. That feels like blasphemy for people in general. Yeah. Like, you didn't finish that book. You didn't finish that project. You didn't go to the rest of that class. You didn't whatever. what advice can you give people for learning when to cut bait? Like, don't get to that point where there's sunk cost, right? Like, how do you know when it's time to stop doing something that might not be working for you?
Yeah. So first of all, everyone should play poker, preferably no limit Texas Hold'em, because that game will teach you when to throw away cards that you maybe have invested a ton of chips in getting to a certain point in the hand, but it's mathematically impossible for you to win anymore, right? And so then at that point, the only thing you can do is try to bluff your opponent off it by pushing tons of chips in. But guess what happens if that bluff gets called? You lose. And that I mean, seriously, play poker. If you've never played before, play it. But that analogy plays, like, let's say people, another example, we have a gym member who is 8 years from retirement with Wells Fargo, been there the whole time. He has a great career, obviously a pretty big retirement package. And I was like, dude, you're not going to make it another 8 years because you're working like 70-hour weeks and you're just not going to make it. And there's the psychological, like, you can keep pushing, right? Like mentally, like, no, I can do it, like that mental fortitude. But at some point, your bluff is going to get called and your body's going to shut down and you're going to get some sort of chronic illness or something that forces you to step away. And then you're going to go, man, I wish I had done this by choice instead of by force. Right? So I don't know that necessarily specifically answers your question. But I think it's something you really have to respect.
I think it helps put it into context that there are forces that are outside of what we can just muscle through and control. There's, I talk about this blog post a lot when it comes to people and their jobs. And you're right, people identify. I mean, how many times do people, like, you ask a person, you know, who they are, what they do, and they say, I am the insert your title of insert your department at insert your company. And I talk to entrepreneurs, like when people are looking to start businesses, people probably reach out to you too, like, what do I do? And they have like the same like look on their face. They're like freaking out. And one of the first things I tell them is I'm like, you need to divorce yourself from that sentence because you're going to feel like garbage for the next number of years if your identity is wrapped up in a title that someone else said had value versus you deciding that the activity you're doing just has intrinsic value and it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care. Call yourself the high priestess of your company or whatever title you want to give yourself. Doesn't matter. You have to have value in the work that you're doing. And that is such an important piece, I think, in helping people think about whether they want to continue something or not. And, you know, I mentioned this blog post. A woman named Bronnie Ware wrote this blog post years ago. It went viral. It's called The Regrets of the Dying. And I think about that post on a weekly basis because one of the most common things that people regret at the end of their life is working too hard. They regret spending too many hours at a job that took them away from the other things that they valued and that they really wanted to do in their life. And at the end of the day, your job is not going to somehow extend your life or give you a second shot or give you some trophy that somehow makes it worth it. You're going to get one shot at this, and time is so finite that it's not worth spending it doing those things. This is why I love having life design conversations, why I want to bring people who are as simultaneously inspirational as you, right? You've done all these amazing things. That's really inspiring, but also as realistic and down to earth as you to say, no, there's a ton of stuff that I stopped doing because it just didn't work and I just didn't want to anymore. It just wasn't fun. That's why I love these conversations.
Well, and I want to be clear about something too. Like, it's not about the achievements. Like, who cares about like who cares about any of the things that I'm specifically saying are achievements, right? Like, I sold a company, I, bought a farm, like all this stuff. None of those matter. What matters is I love the things that I do. I enjoy my life. That's what it's about to me. Like, I didn't buy olive trees in Italy because I wanted to like check off that achievement, or, I wanted to be able to like increase my margins on like olive oil. Like, none of that. I did it because I want to be able to take people to the Grove and show them how we pick olives and have a dinner in between the trees, because I will enjoy the hell out of that. Like, that's why I did it. And that's what it's all about. Like, cool, I sold the company. That's a really neat achievement. But what was way more fun was actually doing it along the way. Like, I didn't do that startup entrepreneur life thing where I like lived underneath my desk and, and like punished myself for 3 years and then got an exit. I loved what I was doing at the time. It just so happens that it ended in an exit because, we did a good job. So I think that's the thing we should try to center as much as possible. Like, it's not about the achievements, because to your point, none of those things are fulfilling. Like, no one is ever going to come and hand you like the trophy or the giant check because you checked enough boxes. If you hated doing all those things along the way, what did you do it for? It doesn't matter. One more thing that came to mind after the sort of previous thread. Have you ever read Seth Godin's The Dip?
Mm-hmm. I got it from you, actually. So this is interesting. This tells you how important this conversation is. So Dave, we're at the gym one day, we're hanging out, and I think you made like half of an announcement, even maybe one email went out where you were like, "Hey, I know, right? I'm getting a lot of questions from people around like starting businesses, quitting jobs, making really big life changes, whatever. Do you guys want to like stay after class and like talk about it?" And I think 36 people signed up from like a non-announcement that was never repeated again. And that's where you gave out this book, The Dip. But that tells me the need for having a realistic conversation about what you are allowed to do with your own life, because you have in 2 seconds a filled room of people who are like eagerly waiting, like, give me permission to do the thing that I know I need to do. And I freaking hate everything about what I'm doing now.
Exactly. I think we called it something like Quitters Club or something like that. Yeah. Because it was essentially about quitting things. And the reason I gave out The Dip, and it's one of my favorite books to give out to people or recommend to people, because Seth Godin is great in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And he kind of just outlines in his very like interesting and methodical way a bunch of examples of people pushing through what he calls the dip. And for those who aren't familiar, the dip is that long slog of work that it takes to achieve something great. One of the examples in the book is Yelp. Like, Yelp with 3 or 4 restaurant listings is totally useless. Yelp with 300 million listings or whatever is this amazing property that then went on to, I think they screwed up an exit when they could have sold to Google or something like that. And Yelp is like totally unethical now, but
always sell to Google.
Yeah, exactly. But that's kind of missing the point. Like, Yelp created this massively valuable property that is, theoretically good by slogging through the dip. But there are times when it's not worth slogging through the dip, and you should cut away, bail out, eject, do whatever you need to do. And knowing the difference is kind of like the key. And the important distinction he makes too is like, it doesn't mean it's not going to be hard work. Like, some of the stuff in the dip is still hard work, even when you're following the path of least resistance. But the whole idea is to not make it harder than it needs to be. And to know when it's time to cut away. My example with the gym is I saw the writing on the wall with COVID, and I knew that we could try to fight against it despite it being an uphill battle. I think that we'll probably have another shutdown period sometime in the late fall. And I just didn't see the gym surviving multiple shutdowns within a 12-month period. Could we have survived one? Yeah, probably. But what I did instead was I saw that dip coming and I was like, no, this is not a good dip to fight through. I'm going to cut away. And I converted the gym that was super successful into essentially like a co-op model where the members that were currently there are sharing the expenses. And it's not a job for me anymore. Like, I make zero. I still kind of manage some of the administrative of it, but I make $0 from it. And that's okay, because the alternative was pouring my heart and soul into this thing that was essentially dying because of forces I can't control. And I see fellow industry people, gym owners doing this right now, killing themselves to try to save their gyms. And I'm kind of like, guys, I get it. I get it. But to use your sunk cost fallacy that we've talked about, like, it's a sunk cost, guys. You had a good run. I had a good decade run with the gym. These are forces that are no fault of my own. And I could have my ego wrapped up in it. And I could be like, but I've worked so hard to build this thing. It doesn't matter. I didn't screw it up. The universe did. So what do? I pivot. I change direction. I figured out how I could sort of save the important part of the gym, which was giving the people that valued it as, there's been people that have told me, like, there's no other place like Movement. I can't imagine working out at any other gym.
Mm-hmm.
So I've preserved that place for them as much as I can. And I've moved on to do something else. So, if anybody's listening and you're kind of on that fence and you want to join the Quitters Club, I would definitely recommend the Dip. It's like a 20-minute read, typical Seth Godin. It's really, really quick. And I think it's really valuable, and it might help you tease out when it's worth pushing through and when it's worth cutting away.
Mm-hmm. I promise you, there are quite a few people listening to this right now that resonate with, I'm staying in my lane. I've been in my lane. I followed the rules. This is awful. I'm slogging. I hate it. I don't want to do this anymore. Maybe you are 3 glasses of wine in and you're finally admitting it. Either way, there are people listening to this who are in that rut. What advice do you have for them to start to shake things up and rattle the cages a little bit and begin to get out of it?
That's a great question. We have a sign or a sticker thing on the wall in our gym that's a quote from Einstein. And I'm not big on quotes, but I particularly like this one. He said, "Nothing happens until something moves." So you need to make some changes. And that doesn't mean you need to quit your job, but you need to start making little incremental changes. And this was something I learned from a mentor and business partner of mine who, Mark, as well. Just change anything. Literally change the way you drive to work. What is that going to do? Well, you're going to see different sights along the way. You're going to have different influences. If you have stops that you normally make, you're going to have new stops and different ones where you're going to talk to different people. And maybe one of those is going to end up being that first customer that you weren't looking for, but you got to talking to them at a coffee shop and you mentioned this thing that you happen to be thinking about doing. And they were like, "Oh, but that's exactly what I've been looking for." And boom, now you just got your first customer without having quit your job, created your business plan, created your logo and stuff, and then went out looking for them. So change things. Change where you work out. If you don't work out, start working out. You wouldn't believe what that could do. Literally anything, but look at most people are they think that they're exerting free will in all of their choices all day long. And I bet if you look at your average day, you do the same exact thing almost every day.
It's 40%. 40% of behavior during a day is involuntary. Like,
there you go.
We aren't even paying attention to any of it. It's crazy.
Nope. Yep. You drive the same way, you eat the same things, you see the same people, you do everything the same. Even if, and by the way, I'm not exempt from that, right? Like
no one is.
Most of my days look roughly the same. Even if I go skydiving and do something that most people would view as like totally out there, for me, it's just part of the routine. I'm in the summer, I do that 2-3 days a week. That's about 40%. So that's my advice, is start changing things. It doesn't matter what it is, just change it up. You never eat takeout Thai food? Great. Start doing takeout Thai food. Just change it up.
I love it. How would you describe psychological strength? What does it mean to be psychologically strong to you?
So the definition that I use for physical strength is, and I forget exactly how I typically word this, but something to the effect of the ability to produce, reduce, redirect, and maybe one other word in there, force. That's what strength is. So I think that if we'd apply that to psychological strength, it's essentially the same thing, except it's not happening like in the physical world. It's happening in the mental world, like the ability to kind of produce the thoughts you want to produce, reduce the thoughts you might want to reduce, redirect the thoughts that you might want to redirect. I have some qualms about how meditation and pretty much every other non-Western practice like ayahuasca and all these things are taken piecemeal and utilized. But that is, as I understand it, one of the premises of meditation, right? It's not learning to control your thoughts. It's learning how to be flexible with your thoughts and create them, dispose of them, redirect them, and let them come back at another time. So I guess that's how I would define psychological strength, the same way that I define physical strength, just in the mental realm.
I love it. This has been awesome. Can you give us a little direction? Where can people learn more about you online? Where can people buy your olive oil? Because it's so delicious. Like, I promise you, you have never tasted olive oil like this before. You just have not. It's incredible. So give us a little direction on where you're at online.
Yeah, I definitely have no qualms about saying that too, because I get at least one email a week that's like, yeah, I didn't really understand the big deal about olive oil until I had yours. I get it now.
100%.
And not to go too far into that, but the reality is most people haven't had actual olive oil. They've had something that's been an adulterated product. And it's like having, Sunny D your whole life, and then you have a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice, and you're like, oh my God, this is a completely different thing, right? Yeah. And olive oil is a fresh juice product. So my website is dellanave.com/olive-oil, or actually, that's the olive oil website. Dellanave.com is still my fitness articles and just musings and stuff like that. That may change. I may actually just push the olive oil completely over to there. But for as of now, that's where it is. You can order pretty much anytime. I almost always have stock now, although it's been selling out so fast. There are times when I can't keep it in stock. And then probably when this podcast comes out will be right around the time that the documentary drops. And that's going to be fromthesourcedoc.com. And that is the documentary we did I just wanted to tell the stories of some of the people I know in Italy that produce these incredible food products. So it originally started with the idea of, let's go show Luigi in the mill and how he makes this olive oil. And then it expanded to, let's ride motorcycles across Italy and make multiple stops at multiple places, all friends of mine, all people I know who produce, really wonderful things. Hazelnuts in Northern Italy, traditional balsamic vinegar, wine, olive oil, fruit preserves. Yeah. So whole 9 yards. So those would be the two things that I would love people to go check out. And you can follow me on Instagram. I'm DDN3D. I make no promises about what the content will contain, but some people tend to enjoy it.
It's about as variable as the background that we talked about with you. You can watch Dave make his camper van, and then there's a skydive video, and then maybe some pigs in there somewhere. I mean, geez, it's like a assortment.
I got a call from a pig farmer yesterday who ordered 16 bottles of my lemon olive oil because he does tastings at the farm, and I'm going to buy pork from him. So yeah, you might see pigs on it pretty soon.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Dave, this has been fantastic. I got your email about the fact that your family bought this grove of olive trees, and it was just the spark that I'm like, we have to have you on to have this life design conversation, because there are ways that you approach life, assumptions that you check and test and experiment with and cast aside, and just ways that you incrementally test your way into, new lanes and new paths that I knew that people had to hear from you, if for no other reason to get inspiration about what it could look like if you have the audacity to disobey some of the rules that you think are there that are actually just unchecked assumptions. So I appreciate so much that you're here. It's just been wonderful. And I can't wait to see these olive trees and where all of this goes. So thanks so much.
Me too. Thank you for having me. It's been really fun. I hope that it feels weird to say that I might be an inspiration, but I hope that that's what it is. And I do get messages from people. They're like, hey, I love seeing all your projects on Instagram because it inspires me that maybe I can tackle it. And, if that's the effect it's having, I think that's really cool. And I'm encouraged by that.
I love it. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, April.
Tell me if this sounds like you. I'll finally be happy. I'll finally take a breath. I'll finally find some balance when I get through this crazy season of life. We hear that from so many people, and the fact is, many times, life is just a crazy season. All of it. Between your career, your family, your community obligations, attempting to have a social life, and trying to fit in self-care, whatever that is, we end up feeling stretched so thin. Now, I want to challenge you to think about things differently. Rather than focusing on external circumstances and their impact on your happiness, your sense of ease and balance, and your mental well-being, what if, instead, you focused on something you can actually control? What if you built the psychological strength that would allow you to thrive through life when things are going well and even when they're not? What if you could feel less scattered, more in control, less anxious, more peaceful and joyful? We want that for you too. That's why we are so beyond excited to announce the beta release of our signature Psych Strength Building program, Ascend. This program combines evidence-based tools, techniques, and information from the fields of psychology and life design to focus on 3 important modules: you, your mind, and your life. Learn your unique combination of strengths, values, and identity, and the ways in which they interact and lead you to approach life in your unique way. Dig into your mind to understand the conscious and subconscious processes that act as a lens through which you experience life. And finally, harness the power of life design to begin to steer your life into alignment with who you uniquely are. Enrollment in this beta round of Ascend is open now, and because it's our beta round, the price is astonishingly low. So if you have ever had even a suspicion that you could benefit from building psychological strength through a guided, science-backed experience, now is the time. Visit www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend for more information and to join us. Friends, it is time to build psychological strength. It's time to live by design and not by default. It is time to live like your life depends on it, because it does. Join us in Ascend by visiting www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. That's www.peakmindpsychology.com/ascend. It's a simple fact that nearly everyone in the world could benefit from building psychological strength, but not everyone will put in the time and effort to do so. But today you did. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Building Psychological Strength. Now, if you're interested in building the mental toughness, confidence, and resilience you need to thrive through life's ups and downs, visit us at www.peakmindpsychology.com. Also, if there's someone in your life who could benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you yourself found this episode valuable, meaning if you took away even one insight that you can use to build psychological strength in your own life, we would so appreciate it if you would drop us a rating and a review on iTunes. The thing is, the more ratings and reviews we have, the easier it is to get this powerful and important content out to the people who need to hear it. Remember, your mind can be your most valuable asset or your biggest liability, and you get to choose. So choose wisely, my friend. And I'll see you next time on Building Psychological Strength.